And if you can incorporate a reason for serving others in every change that you make, it helps the people that are maybe reluctant to change and say, oh, okay, I'll do this for them. And that's a really good reason to do anything, to serve other people.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again for our podcast video, Art of the Assistant. And man, am I excited about today. And I know you say, Trig, I hear that every time you do one, but it's true. But today I'm exceptionally excited because I've got my friend Kurt Skelly with us today. And Kurt's one of these guys that, you know, I have no notes written because we think alike. Our journeys have been the same in many ways. And we just know we're going to be able to take off with just a subject that's heavy upon our hearts, things that we've seen in our own ministries, things that we've seen in others' ministries that have gone well and that have not gone so well. So Kurt, welcome. Great to have you on Art of the Assistant, my brother.
Yeah, I have really been looking forward to this. And I'm just humbled that any of you would be listening right now. And insofar
they might not be anymore. They might have just turned you off.
They may have, but for the two people that are listening, let me just say hi to my wife
and my mom. And my mom.
There we go. And my mom.
Oh man. Well, Kurt, it's great to have you on here and just excited again about jumping in and talking really what I think is so important. You know, when we talk about transitions. And you coming into faith, me coming into faith. And I know there was someone in between you and Doc Forrester, but still the people, their heart, their mind was, you know, they was still there. And he was still a striving force not force, but a striving influence in the church. I come in for Benny Moran, who had been there 49 years, started the church in his living room. And the majority of the people that I was ministering to were people that came up under him. And so anything we were going to do, or you and I were going to do, was going to be different. And as these men are listening, many of these assistants, if the Lord leads them to do so, will step into a ministry one day, and very possible a ministry from someone that's retired, stepped down, or even passed away. And knowing how to go into that, knowing when to change, how to change, what not to change, it's extremely important. And so I just thought we could talk today about that, about this aspect of, you know, the change is compromise. It's not, but how much is too much? And what I want to springboard off of is Joshua. Joshua has always been my hero of the faith. From the time I was a kid, I knew that when God just sealed the deal for me to be in ministry, he brought me to Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9. And that's a long story, and my heart's always wanted to be the Joshua. I've always wanted to be the guy that came in behind a founding pastor and to build upon that foundation. It's a weird thing, but it's just what God laid on my heart. And when Joshua starts off in Joshua chapter 1, you know, he's getting ready to cross the Jordan, and God comes to him and he says, all right, Joshua, here's how you're going to do it. And he's like, let me guess, I'm going to take my staff and put it up and put it over the Jordan. God says, no, the priests are going to go, and their feet are going to get in the water, and then the waters will open. And, you know, I add to the text, I take liberty here, but, you know, you can just see the older guys standing back thinking, you know, this isn't the way Moses did it. This isn't the way I heard about Moses doing this. You know, is this really what Joshua should be doing? I mean, is this God's way? This wasn't Moses's way. And a lot of times coming into a new ministry, you feel like the Joshua, you know, we're not doing it the way the guy before me did. So when we step into these ministries, Kurt, and stepping into those situations, you know, some guys are 100 days, a year, 5 years. When is it safe to say, okay, we can start making some changes, and when?
Well, I mean, I love the illustration that you use about Joshua. And when it comes to the methodology of what they did, indeed, it was different. I mean, it was different for Joshua to tell them, but here's what was the same. What was the same was both of these men were in tune with God. Both of them did what God told them to do. So I think the key is when leadership has to stay in tune with the Lord, stay in tune with the Word of God, and then it would have been disobedient for Joshua to have done it the way that Moses did. You know, the obedience was following Moses' relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like when we came to faith, they asked me a bunch of questions. And it's interesting, when you go to a new church, the questions that are asked tell you a whole lot about the priorities of the people. And it was interesting because most of the questions that I received had nothing to do with doctrine. They had nothing to do with my stance on the Bible, my stance on the Trinity, my stance on the deity of Jesus Christ. They had to do with things like preferential issues. And preferences go both ways. So to me, it's like, for someone to say, well, that's just a preference, my response would be, well, yeah, that's just a preference. So it goes both ways.
Right.
So to understand preferences, and I think that's where we're going to go with this conversation. Yeah. But to me, the key to preference is deference. The key to preference is deference. That if we do identify something in ministry, indeed, as a preference, then my responsibility to that conversation is deference. So with preference, there should be deference. And we found that to be true here at Faith Baptist Church. Now, we could talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and especially the when. When is change appropriate? What change is appropriate? How should that change be implemented? So I'm willing to go down that road, however you want to go down that road today.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's look. So do you remember the first change that you made that in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, this will be interesting to see how this goes? Do you remember which one that was, or did you have one? I'll give you, for instance, with mine. Yeah. Okay, so mine was, we had Sunday night services, and they were at 7:00 on Sunday night. And oh my goodness, you talk about late. It's like, oh, by the time we were done, and if we grab a bite to eat, we're getting home late and getting the kids in bed and trying to get to school. And it was just terrible. And it was kind of the squeaky wheel. A lot of people were complaining about it. And all right, so I talked to the deacons about it. I said, okay, we're going to make a service change, and we'll start doing Sunday night services at 6 p.m. And we didn't vote on it. We just made that a decision. And I remember announcing that, and Pastor Moran, being right up there, 3 rows up, and just kind of like, oh man, wonder how he's going to take this. This was 45 years of Sunday nights at 7, and now I'm changing it. And so he let a couple of weeks go by, and then he's like, hey, I want to talk to you about that Sunday night service change. I was like, oh no, here it comes, here we go. I said, okay. I said, what's up? He's like, that was such a smart thing to do. He's like, that was just wise. I'm so glad you did it, man. We're getting home before dark, and I'm just glad you made that change. And I'm like, why didn't you ever make that change? He's like, because in 1971, the church voted for Sunday nights at 7, and that's what we did. It was just like, this is what the church voted on. That's what we did. But man, I'm glad we're changing it. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh no, this is going to be bad. What's going to happen? And with Pastor Moran even still alive, he's like, hey, that's a good thing. And so what a
blessing. Yeah, what a blessing to have that support from him.
Right. Because I wasn't sure this was going to be the first thing I was doing when I came in. And it's not a doctrinal thing. I'm not changing doctrine. This is what I'm doing. Now, when you came, Kurt, did you guys have were you hymn books, or did you have music on the screen too? Or do you guys do music on the screen? How do you do music at Faith?
Let me go to that question, but I want to say one thing before that. Yeah. It was interesting because you asked me a moment ago, what was one thing you changed? And I was just about to say, well, I think the first major change we made was Sunday night services.
Okay.
So it was interesting that you brought that up. And hours later, I changed it to 5.
Okay.
But here are a couple things that we did, and really, and this applies to all of our change. So anything that we've changed at Faith Baptist Church, and we've not made wholesale changes, but everything that we've changed has followed this rubric. Okay. And that is this. Number 1, don't change anything. Try things. Yeah. I learned that years ago from my friend Steve Chappell. Don't change anything. Try things. Because change is kind of like, we always did it this way. Now we're always going to do it this way. It's a hard edge. Instead of providing a baton passing segment and saying, hey, folks, here's something we're going to try. So we're going to try Sunday nights at 5. Hey, what we might find is it was a total bust. We might find that this thing just doesn't work, but we're going to try this. Number 2, provide the rationale way ahead of time. So here's what I did on Sunday nights. I said, folks, here's something we're going to try. we're going to try Sunday nights at 5. Now, let me give you 2 reasons why we're going to try that. Number one, we have so many workers that work in Washington, D.C. They would love to come to Sunday night church. Some of them can't just because they get up at 3:30 in the morning. Others do, but it's a real sacrifice. Why don't the rest of us, why don't we be sensitive to that? Let's do this for them. Number two, we have a lot of people that have young children and they're trying to be faithful to Sunday nights. And I want them to be here, but sometimes because of bedtimes and all of that, it's more difficult. So why don't we do this for them? And if you can incorporate a reason for serving others in every change that you make, it helps the people that are maybe reluctant to change and say, oh, okay, I'll do this for them. And that's a really good reason to do anything, to serve other people. Yeah. And then I think the third thing is, so number one, get ahead of it, create the rationale, use the word try, not the word change. Yeah. Then give people ways by which this trying this is going to be a blessing to other people. And then I said, the last thing I did was this. I call this public coaching. And I think it's important for every pastor to do. And I call it we speak, W-W-E, we speak. And here it is. Ready? Hey, folks, at Faith Baptist Church, we don't get worked up about minor issues. We just don't do that. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a good attitude about this. We're going to have a good attitude about this. We're going to try it. We're going to be a blessing. And I'll tell you what, we did that, communicated it way ahead of it, in advance, did all the things I just suggested, and we just didn't even hit a speed bump on it. It was a big win for us.
That's awesome. I think, one thing I have wrote down here is communicate. And you just said that communication, how we do it. That's key when we're doing these type of changes. Like you said, why? Well, and we got a large congregation of older people at the time that need to get home before dark. And they're coming at dark, they're leaving at dark after time change, and we need to be thinking about them. So I think that's key in any change that we make. And it's also in communication. Communication is comfort. So they know that, hey, Kurt doesn't have another agenda here.
Right.
This is why we're doing what we're doing. Because I think sometimes when we make change, people automatically think the worst is coming.
Sure.
Oh man, he's moving it to 5, and the next thing you know, we're going to be getting rid of Sunday nights. Or hey, they're putting another song, and we'll talk about this. They're putting a newer song on the screen. The next thing you know, we won't be singing hymns ever again. And communication, I think, like you said, is key in just comforting our people and explaining why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes,
and who we are and the whys behind it.
No, that's so good. And you bring up a great point. And that is, number one, there is an aversion to change in all of us. There's a certain comfort to always doing things the same way. So communication mitigates that. I love that. And then there was something else I was going to say, but I can't remember. It'll come back to me here in a moment.
Yeah. So when, we've all, I think, adapted change too, especially through COVID. And man, it was a change every week.
Oh,
and
I know the other thing I was going to say, real quick.
Yeah, you're good.
That is one of the reasons why people are averse to change, is because a former leader. Now, that didn't happen with us at Faith, and it doesn't sound as if that happened to you. But sometimes a former leader has elevated that whatever you're going to change to a position that is not biblical. For instance, I remember a well-known fundamental leader coming to our church in Connecticut. I'm talking about 30 years ago. And the Sunday evening service at 6, he got up publicly and said, you know why some churches have moved their Sunday evening service to 6? Because that's what the modernists do. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So I think sometimes when fundamental leaders elevate preferences to the point of a biblical doctrine, people that aren't judgmental, they're not critical, that just are willing to receive that from a leader, then they can get that in their mind too. So you're having to dismantle sometimes some of that wrong thinking about preferential things.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the big ones that we had at Faith that still comes up every now and then is hymn books.
Right.
and music on the screen. I don't know. Do you guys do music on the screen?
We do.
Okay. Was that there when you came, or did you bring that in?
No, it was.
Okay.
It was.
Okay. So we just had the hymn books, and I'm preaching through Hebrews, and I'm getting ready to go to before the throne of God. We can come boldly before the throne of grace. And what a better song to tie into that than before the throne of God.
Right.
And I spent a Sunday, just talking to our people about this. And you talk about the we. So what I did, I said, Faith, look. And even though I wasn't even, I would have been a baby at this time and in a different state, but I'm like, you remember when we would sing Victory in Jesus way back in the 70s in the old building, and the old hymn book that Faith had didn't have Victory in Jesus in it. And the kids would fight to see which one was going to get to go up and hold the poster board up.
Huh.
Because you wrote the words, and they're all, they're smiling. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. I said, all I am doing is holding a poster board up in the back of the church. It's just a big one. And it's just words to a good hymn. And there's good hymns out there that are being written by good friends of mine and people who have spoken in this church that we need to be singing. They're not in our hymn books. So I'm putting on a big poster board behind me on the screen. And it was just communication, explaining it. We're not throwing out hymns. We're just bringing in some new ones, just like these new ones were added to these hymn books later on. And that was it, and explain it. But then the first time we sang, Carrie started crying at the piano because everybody was looking up. My kids, I'm up there and I'm hearing my children. At that time, they were little, singing because they were, how it is. They put the hymn book on the top of the pew and look down. And now everybody's up. And after that first song, nobody ever talked about going back, just because. But again, like we're saying, it's that communication. I think that's got to be key. So young guys coming in, then one of the questions we get is, do we gradually? It's like pulling off the Band-Aid. Do I do it just a little at a time, or do I just rip it off all at once? Is there wisdom in one or the other? How do we balance it? I'm coming in. Should I just, blow up the auditorium and redo everything, or just gradually do it? What's your take on that, and words of wisdom for guys sitting in that seat?
I think the implementation of something can be like pulling off a Band-Aid, but I'm not a big fan of pulling off the Band-Aid without a time of teaching and communication. Good. So that when the Band-Aid gets pulled off, people knew why the Band-Aid was there. They knew why the Band-Aid was no longer necessary. And they knew that we're going to rip this thing off, because it's a whole lot easier emotionally to rip the Band-Aid off than to try to do it piece by piece and pull out every little hair on your arm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. And so coming in then, when you're looking at it as a new pastor coming in, as you were coming into faith, did you lay out, look, I know the church, I know the people, here are some things I would like to do over the years? Or did you just come in saying, hey, Lord, you just lead as we go? Did you talk to the leaders about some things that you might change, or were you open with them, or did you just kind of say, okay, Lord, we'll cross that bridge when we get there?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I think some of it was covered in just the question and answer time. Pastor Skelly, who are you? And I would talk about this. What are the things that matter to you?
Yeah.
Here, and what are the things about which you will not make a big deal? This. And so I was very communicative about all of those things, all the big preferences. I was very communicative about that. Yeah. On the other hand, I would say this: if a church mirrors exactly all the preferences of the pastor, then really that pastor is a selfish leader, because a pastor should also be yielding his preferences. So if we're teaching people, hey, there are some preferences you need to be willing to yield, then I think as a pastor, there are some preferences we need to be willing to yield. So for instance, Faith Baptist Church, is it exactly where I would be musically, or exactly where I would be in some of these other hot button areas? No, it's not. I would probably allow myself, matter of fact, I do allow myself liberty beyond what our church does. I'm very comfortable with our safe approach. Yeah. And So to me, as a pastor, I feel as if I'm yielding some of my preferences as well.
That's good. That's really good. And I appreciate that and love that. And I think that's wise, because I've had those conversations too. Well, honestly, I'm kind of where you are, but this is where the church is.
Sure.
And this is what's best for the church. So follow-up question with that is, as you travel and you're in these other churches, you've been at West Virginia church, you've been at, where you are, how much does culture come in when we're looking at, so let's say we have a guy born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and now he finds himself planted at, Parkersburg, West Virginia. And how much of that changes because of culture? And when you see that and you're in these churches, we even talked about sometimes when you're preaching, I think guys change their preaching depending on the culture or the context that they're in, right, wrong, or indifferent. Does culture play a part on a young guy going into a state, into an area that, he's not familiar with?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a softball question. Of course it does. And it's interesting because we all get that when it comes to our missiology. Every one of us gets that. We all understand that if I'm going to go to India, I'm not going to try to Americanize or independent Baptistize their service structure. For instance, I've been to India, the men sit on one side, women on the other. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm not going to say, hey, bless God, husbands and wives, sit together and put your armor on. No, I'm not going to do that. So to me, it's yes, I think you want to understand culture. If I'm going to a different country, I want to do the best I can to learn their language. And learning their language is more than this. Mm-hmm. Language is the way we comprehend things. We understand this in Bible preaching and teaching, that I don't want to read the Bible with Western eyes. I want to pay attention to Bible geography and customs, because I want to understand this text within the culture in which it was written and which it was spoken. So culture is absolutely imperative. And we dare not make a change without understanding culture. Now, I'll say three things about culture. Number one, there are aspects of culture that in and of themselves are wrong. So we live in this world. We live in the arrangement of this world. And the Bible says we're not to love the world, neither the things that are in the world. So there are parts of culture that should be repudiated, no doubt. And we independent Baptists, we're good at that. Yep. Okay, but there are other parts of culture that ought to be celebrated. There are redeeming qualities to culture. For instance, it is the culture in certain countries, Japan, Korea, to have a healthy respect for one's elders, to be very deferential to one's grandparents. Well, that's not the culture in America, unfortunately, but it is in Japan. So if I were a missionary to Japan, I'm going to celebrate that. I'm going to celebrate that culture. In America, our culture is when there's a disaster, people jump on with disaster relief. Is that a good thing? Yeah, that's a great thing. So we ought to celebrate that. So there are certain things in culture that ought to be repudiated. There are certain things in culture that ought to be celebrated. But here's the thing. Most of culture is neither right nor wrong. It's neutral. For instance, if I go to a certain home that maybe they have some Asian influence, you're going to take off your shoes. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to say, bless God, there's nothing in the Bible about taking off your shoes when you go to someone's house. No, I'm just going to defer because that's their culture. Yeah. So what we need to do in any culture, whether I pastor in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or Connecticut or many of the other places I've been to preach, I want to know what is appropriate. And then I want to stay within those guardrails of appropriateness, understanding that this is neither right nor wrong. And I'll even make a stronger statement. And the stronger statement is, insofar that culture is neutral, I am obligated to change to it. Yeah. That's a heavy statement.
That's a big statement.
So insofar,
a big word. Okay.
You're right. So insofar that culture is neutral, I have an obligation. And that was Paul's entire philosophy in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. So to the Jew, I'm going to become as a Jew. To the Greek, as a Greek. So the whole issue in Romans 14, I am willing to defer my preferences in any area, especially in a public setting. Now, if I want to do that, I can do it at home, but I'm going to defer in a public setting to the culture. And that is such a wise standard of practice.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so good. I had a good friend of mine years ago. He and his wife went to a small, and I was originally from that area, so I knew what they were going into. And it was just not culturally her at all. She comes from the arts background and concerts and music, and they're moving into this small country town where it's Friday night football and Biddy League baseball that's the highlight. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in their house, and she said, "I hate football." And I remember leaving thinking, man, they're going to struggle, because the whole community is just about football and playoffs and from the little guys up. And I think it's important for us, West Virginia, we have festivals like crazy. And it's the Buckwheat Festival and the Rams Festival and the Springs Festival. And we went to the Springs Festival this year, and it was like a church gathering. Everybody's there. And I told my intern, look, you got to come, man, because this is culture. This is where we go. This is where we are. And it's fun. And we had a great time. My kids love it. But it's a cultural thing. And it's not something every church is going to do or have. But I think there are certain things that we need to adapt in order to be, like you said, all things to all men.
Yes.
And where they are. Can you think of any, what are some cultural differences when you're coming from Western Pennsylvania now to Virginia, and two different types of people? Can you think of anything offhand that was different for you to adapt to culturally?
Yeah. So one of the big things coming from Western Pennsylvania, which is very sedentary. Mm-hmm. Western Pennsylvania, our church in Western Pennsylvania would not be much different in its thinking and its culturality than your church,
right?
In Morgantown, right. Are very similar. So coming to Virginia, there are essentially three cultures in our church. There is the Virginian, who is a lifelong Virginian here, who's been here his whole life, who is more of a Southern Virginian. Okay. They are blue collar. They are hunters and fishermen, all the things you would think stereotypically of Virginia. But there are two other huge demographics here. Number one, there are government employees, a ton of them. People that come in, they're contractors, they work in DC, they're government employees. Government people, that is a culture. They think differently. And then there's a huge military component here. Okay. We have Veterans Day. I mean, you have people it's all men and women. Wow. It's amazing. Why? Wow. Because we have Quantico nearby. We have many, we're a destination place for retirement for many people that come out of the military. So one of the things that really I struggled with when I came here was in Western Pennsylvania, nobody left. Nobody left. Why? Because you live there and you stay there. Here, everybody leaves. People come in for 3 years and then they leave. They come in for a contract and then they leave. And so there was a little bit of a mentality, not among all our people, but among some of our people, almost as if to say, I don't want to get to know these people. They're just going to be here and gone. I don't want to invest in this relationship. And we certainly don't want to give them leadership opportunity because they're here and gone. Yeah. But my thought was, that's not fair. That's not fair to somebody that's doing a 3-year stint, not to be able to speak into the life of our church. We're inheriting sometimes some really solid church members. Yeah. So even understanding that culture and making adjustments to it was a big part of the early 2 years that I was here.
Yeah. So how does that impact your preaching? You've got, these three different groups, and as you're sitting down, you're thinking, okay, some are here gone, some are military, some are, all week long, they've done things they're not even allowed to tell me about. And the other guys are going to tell me about the trout they caught down by the creek. When you preach, do you keep that all in your mind, Kurt, as you're putting that together?
I try to. Yeah, I try to. And when I talk about sermon prep, application is always the last part. You want to think through explanation. Some people call that context, and then illustration. And even in illustrations, I think through it a bit. But application, I think application is a pastor. And to me, the key to application to a message is think your way into the lives of your people and then pray for them.
Mm.
And I think that comes out naturally as you're looking at people in the eye, not looking over people's heads. It ought to become natural and intuitive for a pastor to be looking out and seeing this guy who's a colonel in the Marines, and this other guy who runs a marina at a local lake, and then this other lady here who works in the Pentagon. And when you begin to think through and pray for the people that to whom you're preaching, I think those applications begin to arise naturally.
That's good. That's good. So, you were talking about figuring out, man, I got 3 different groups here and what I have. And I think that's key as you're coming in. It's to figure out or ask the question, okay, why is it this way? And I think, some pastors I've talked to or seeing things they've changed, it would behoove them to ask the question, why? So my wife, she saved me many times with this, is I'm looking up at the auditorium and I'm looking at these curtains that just need to go. And just to give clarification, my wife was born and raised at the church. She was there when they built that building,
She's been waiting to say that for a long time.
Yes. I said, why are we moving these curtains? She's like, don't touch those curtains. So-and-so drove 3 hours south of Charleston, the big city, to get the fabric so she could come back of her own money and make those curtains. And if you change those curtains, you're going to have problems on your hands. So you know what? The way I looked at it, the curtains were not hindering our worship. They were not hindering the word of God. The curtains could stay. And the curtain stayed until the lights went out in 2020, and then we totally redid everything when no one was there, and it was fine after that.
You have a beautiful auditorium, but to me, that is such a great illustration that people are more important than things.
Absolutely. And that comes back then where I was going to follow up, Kurt, was just love. I mean, I think, and you can emphasize this, because out of most people I know, and I'll say this, I feel like one of your gifts and strengths is loving people. When you came in and you spoke for us, our kids loved you, you loved them, and it was just natural. It's natural for you. I'm that way. How important it is for these guys as they come into this church to remember love first.
So let me give you a statement that you probably have never heard in your life. It's unique to me.
Okay.
But people don't care how much you know.
I want to write this down.
It's funny. It's so trite. It is so very true. Love earns us the right to say. I think about what the Apostle Paul said. He said, "O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you. Our heart is enlarged." You're not straightened in us. You're straightened in your own love, your own bowels. Is the word there. So the problem, he said, the reason we're saying things to you that are hard to hear is because we love you, and love gives you ingress in people's lives.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I think, going into a ministry right off the bat, that should be one of the priorities. That it's not, man, I'm going to change this, or I'm going to straighten these people out, or man, wait till they hear me preach. It's just, if we come in, and guys, as you're listening to this and you're, thinking about, man, next year I'm going to start this new ministry, or I'm going into the first of the year, my first words of advice would be go in with a heart of love. Just go in and love these people, and ask God to give you a heart of love for these people. And I would say, Kurt, not only to love that, but even as we were talking, to love the culture that they're in,
celebrate it. Absolutely.
Yeah. We've got, talking about Parkersburg and Beckley, I've got 2 boys, one of my boys in Beckley and one of my boys in Parkersburg from the West Coast. And, I know for Sam coming in and hearing people talk, like, I don't know, Pastor Craig, if he's going to get used to the West Virginia culture or not. I don't, he always talks about driving to church and seeing guys working on their trucks with their shirts off. And I'm not, I don't think he can handle this, but Sam's done a great job, and he loved those people there at Bible Baptist. They love him, but it was just him coming in to love them, to care for them, to love that culture, to adapt himself to the West Virginia culture. And he's excelled. And, he's just done a great job. But I think that's very important as we come into ministries like that. Just humbly coming in. And so you're coming into a ministry then, and, there's some things that you're looking at, Kurt, that you're seeing that, man, you know that eventually we're going to have to cross this. Let's even say it's a style of preaching. All right. So we're expository, we're teaching the word, and you're stepping into a ministry that's just been topical. So Sunday morning, they heard love. Sunday night, they heard joy. Wednesday night, they heard peace. The next Sunday morning, they're hearing a message on Israel. That Sunday night on Palestine. It's just topical. It's all over the board. And you come in and say, open up to Habakkuk chapter 1. And it's like, whoa, what are we doing? Is that something that we should just come right in doing? Or do you think guys should just even look at what they're used to getting fed and work their way into that? What would be your advice in that situation?
My advice would be yes.
Okay.
So I think you can do both. I said, first of all, I think that an expository message properly preached is a topical message because God speaks coherently. So what I would say is early on, if somebody's going into a topical culture where expository preaching has not been the norm and you are an expository preacher, what I would say is emphasize not the exposition, but emphasize the topic that the exposition is exposing. So in that sense, hey, I'm preaching I'm preaching this week, not on John 11 verses 1 through 16, but I'm preaching this week on what's the topic, on how to respond when you perceive that Jesus doesn't show up.
Yeah.
So you can still preach those topics expositorily, but emphasize the topic. So I would say that
That's
first.
Good.
I think number two, we all do topical things, even in the traditional topical sense. We do them at different times. So for instance, we might do a family series on a Wednesday night. We might do a topical series on a Sunday school format. So what I would just say to guys is let people know that those options still exist. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of negating them. It's a matter of assigning them to different time slots.
That's awesome. That's really good. That's really good. So following up with that then, we're kind of in, and you probably see it even more than I do as you travel. The word Sunday school is that's gone away.
As soon as I said it, I thought, do people know what I'm talking about?
So all right, you go into this church, it's got Sunday school. Man, we can't have Sunday school. We've got to have life groups or have this or have. Is Sunday school, calling it Sunday school, in your eyes, that big of a deal? Do we need to, if we switch to life groups, it's going to change things? What's your take, just even personally with that? What do you see with that?
Right. My take is don't get in love with a name, get in love with a biblical ideal. Okay. So for instance, we at Faith, we value 3 ideals, really 4. But as it comes to the church gathering, we value 3 ideals. Here they are. Number 1, we believe that every single person at Faith Baptist Church ought to be able to worship God with his family undistracted. And what I mean by that is husband's not working the sound booth. He's not on the safety team. He's not outside ushering. She's not in the nursery. They're not in junior church. They're together with their children in a worship service. Now, that only works in a church that has multiple services because somebody has to be in the nursery. Somebody has to be in the junior church. Someone has to be elsewhere. But in our church, we're able to say, we value every single person at our church being in a worship service undistracted. That's number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, we value every single person in our church being in a group. That's a smaller subset of people who gather for the purpose of mutual learning, edification, and accountability. So we believe that everybody ought to be in a group. Number 3, we believe that everybody ought to be on a team. So a team differs from a group in the sense that we gather not to look at each other, but to serve with each other. So a team. So we have a bunch of different teams. So in that sense, 3 to thrive. But our 3 to thrive is we want you worshiping. We want you growing in a group. We want you serving on a team. Now, here's the thing. When does that happen? Multiple times. Yeah. So you can meet in a group on Sunday morning. That's Sunday school. Mm-hmm. And some of our older people that love that terminology, I don't care what the terminology is. Call it a group, call it a connection group, call it a life group, call it a small group, call it a Sunday school class. it doesn't matter to me. Use whatever name you want, but here's what it is. Okay, same thing with the team. So our metric for success is how many people are worshiping, growing, and serving. Because think about the physical life. In the physical life, we want to be able to eat and exercise with the right spirit. So the right spirit is worship. Eating is growing in a group. Exercising is serving on a team. So we want that kind of balance in our church. So that's what we've done.
That's good. That's what I was going to say. Balance, I think, is the key when you're looking at that and having that. I'm the same way. We have the 2 services, so my kids know if they're going to serve one, they got to sit one. Now,
but here's the problem, though. The problem is, they've got to serve one and sit one. Okay, but when's the group? Do you not do groups on Sunday morning?
Yeah, we do. We do.
So,
and they've got to be there. They can't miss that.
But what's great for us is this. Okay, so I encourage people either serve and sit on Sunday morning or serve and grow. So you can, or rather, I'm sorry, sit and grow.
Yeah.
So here are your 2 options on Sunday morning. You can come to a service and then go to a group, or group and then service.
Yes.
Or you can come to a service and then serve somewhere else. But if you sit and serve on Sunday morning, then the one component you've missed is a group. So now on Wednesday night, I want you in a group.
That's good.
If you've sat on a Sunday morning and gone to a group, then Wednesday night, I want you to serve.
Yeah.
And then we've provided even other opportunities. In the week, we have groups. In the week, we have serving teams. Yeah. So I just want somebody to have a touch in all 3 areas.
No, I think that's fantastic. And yeah, so my kids know, that's where they want them. We tell our people, that's where I want you. I mean, obviously in the idealistic world, they all would, but we know that's not the case.
Right.
They come, serve, and leave. And, that's between them and the Lord, but we've made ways for them to be there. Like with me, I thought it was interesting is with our groups, I'm expository. So I've got Romans going, I've got Peter going, and I've got Titus going in my different Sunday schools or whatever. And one of my college couples came in late, and the girl was blaming it on her boyfriend. Yeah, he picked me up late. And I was so upset because I didn't want to miss Bible study today. So it was interesting, no matter what we call it. She was talking about Sunday school.
Right.
She was upset that she missed Romans 7 because Johnny was in Romans 7. She missed Bible study today. I thought, if you're going to call it anything, and that's what we default to, praise the Lord.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what we want. And those
let people call it what they want to.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's the way I feel. It like you said, it doesn't matter to me what you want to call it, as long as it's accomplishing what we know it needs to.
Correct.
In regard to that and where that is. So that's good. So these guys coming in, talk about, I had a book called The First 100 Days or the first 5 years coming into ministry. As I've watched some of these guys coming in and coming into ministry, sometimes, Kurt, the worst things that we could do, sometimes it's the small things.
Yep.
Mrs. So-and-so brings peppermints and sets them out in the lobby every single Sunday morning. And one Sunday morning she comes in and her peppermint jar is gone. Well, we're not going to do that anymore because, the paper's getting on the carpet. And that's devastating. Sometimes it's not the major changes that we've got to look at. I think sometimes it's the little ones, that we've got to be careful. But that comes in with, I think, that questioning of why.
Yes. Yeah. Ahead of any change, you've got to ask the why question. Yeah. You're not going to do it perfectly. There are going to be decisions you make that you didn't see because you couldn't possibly have seen it. Like, how would taking this candy away possibly offend somebody is what you're thinking. So you do it. And then you find out later it did offend them. And then you communicate afterward. And the only thing to do is go in and say, I am sorry. The last thing in the world I ever want to do is offend you. Thank you for continuing to come to church and not making this an issue. And I mean,
that's good.
You're gonna, There must needs be offense. It must
Yeah.
needs be that offenses will come. It's going to
Yeah,
happen.
absolutely. It's going to. And the humble approach is the approach, and the I'm sorry approach. And yeah, and arrogant, this is just the way it's going to be because I'm the pastor. That's not going to do. Your church will find itself cut in half very quickly if that's how we come in. So I've got a big one now. All right, take a deep breath, get your drink of water.
I'm ready. I'm gonna hide. I'm gonna hide behind my Bible.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Staff.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to come into situations, and I read Maxwell coming into Morgantown, and in my mind, I was thinking, okay, going. And then I read one of Maxwell's books that said, when you go in, everybody has an A. Everybody starts with an A plus, no matter what your preconceived thoughts are of them until they show you otherwise. So that's what I did. And I'm thankful that the Lord let me read that before I went in, but not everybody's going to stay at an A. And there are going to be staff members that are going to have to be removed. So take us through, Kurt, what, a young guy's coming in, and it could be somebody that's been there 10 years and he's in year number 1, but he knows, okay, we've got to make a change here. How do we go about that?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I do, lessons on that whole
Okay.
concept. But I'll say this. Number one, I agree with Maxwell's philosophy, and that is everyone gets an A. And they've never been under your leadership. Mm-hmm. So you're judging them for their behavior, but they've never been under your leadership. So give them love, believes all things and hopes all things. So when you enter a relationship with a staff member, it's important, just like with a church member, to clearly communicate. Here's what we value. We want you on the team insofar that these non-negotiables are in place. We need the big C's, right? With character and competency and communication and all of that. So I think start there. I think build in checkpoints. So when you communicate with staff, build in checkpoints. Like, we're going to talk about this again in 3 months, or we're going to talk about this on our yearly review. And here are the standards by which you're going to be measured. And all of that is important. But then I would say this: ministry is the investment in your staff. That is real ministry, especially in a growing church. Jesus invested in his staff. The word staff comes from the word for a shepherd's staff. Yeah. And just like a shepherd needed a staff as a tool to protect the sheep and to chastise the sheep and to lead the sheep, so we need staff, as a tool to help us in those ways. So to me, it's a matter of, here's who we are, here's what we do, and then spend your time investing in them. They can't view themselves as widgets. Like, if I just need stuff done, especially the stuff I don't want to do, I give it to a staff member. No, they need to know I love them. I have their best interest in mind. I want them to grow in their leadership. So there's a lot of proactivity on the part of the senior leader to say, I'm vested in your success. I don't have to be the head honcho. I don't have to be the one that gets the praise for every event. I don't want to be the one that has to be the chief decision maker on every issue. In fact, when that staff member is making more and more independent decisions, when he's receiving more and more of the credit for the success of that ministry, that is success. Amen. So I think all of that goes together.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. And then, sometimes but you're there, you're working, and you just know, okay, this isn't working. And so I think you just sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, this isn't working out, or hey, it's time to pray about something else, or what's the best way to do that with someone in those situations?
So that conversation should be obvious to both people, because you have communicated so effectively along the lines that by the time that uncomfortable conversation takes place, that it's obvious to both people. And a lot of times that conversation is, hey, brother, here's my perspective is, I just feel like this is not working out. What is your perspective? Yeah. And many times people will fire themselves. You know what? You're right. So listen, how do we off ramp in a way that's going to be beneficial to you, to your family, to our church, and ask. It's kind of like in discipline with a child. Sometimes you say, well, you did wrong. What do you think an appropriate consequence is? And what you'll find sometimes, especially with teenagers, is they'll suggest a consequence that was beyond what you would have done. Well,
Right.
take my phone away for 9 months.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So to me, I think that's important. Respect, give people an off ramp. Understand that with every staff member failure, there is a wife, there are children, there are people that have been helped, there are investments. So I think it's really, really important to understand that human component. You'll never go wrong. You'll never go wrong being over gracious. You'll never go wrong.
No, you'll never, 5 years from now, you'll never miss that 6-month severance package.
100%.
But by not doing it, you will regret it, and you'll hear about it. And you'll think, man, I wish I would have, but it's too late.
See, and now what I'm going to do, Treg, is I'm going to come apply to work on your staff. And then I'm going to do something really stupid after 2 weeks so I can get
there
6
you go.
months.
There you go, man. There you go. Take it. Go. Put your wife on there too. I'll take care of.
I love that. I love that.
But it's just sometimes it's just the right thing to do.
Right.
And maybe that staff member is going through something where, you know what, I know of a situation right now that the staff member was let go, but I think there is personal stuff going on in the life, and you give the guy 2 months. That's not long enough for him to get help and to figure out what's going on in his own life. The ministry's got the money, you've got the resources. Just give the guy 6 months or whatever. You're not going to hire a staff member the next 3 months anyway. What are you going to do with that? Let them have it, and let them heal. Yes. and seek what God has for them, so they don't have that pressure of providing their family on top of it. I just think I don't know, that's just me, but I think it's the right thing to do. People will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel.
Yeah. To me, that exit is so important, because you want to reserve a brother. You want to keep that relationship.
Not always going to.
You're not always going to, but I'll tell you, we had some situations in Western Pennsylvania where we had to let some people go, and it was difficult. It's always difficult.
Yeah.
But in all of those situations, I think everyone, with a possible exception of one, we have a good relationship with those people, and that's important.
Yeah. I think that's, if that's possible, I think that's the ideal, and God uses it. We don't know Paul and Barnabas, if they ever had coffee together or not, but God used something to happen to separate the two of them. And then look what God did with that. And I mean, from using John Mark to write Mark to Paul and Silas, I mean, we wouldn't have any of that had it not been God saying, okay, guys, you've done your time together. Now it's time to go separate ways. And that's not all bad.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
And sometimes that happens. So, well, Kurt, any last words as you think about these guys? We're talking about these assistant pastors. Maybe they've been in the ministry a couple of years. They're getting ready to step into this senior role. It might be a small church. It might be a big church. What are some words of wisdom that you would give to them as they are stepping in and they look around and they see things that need changed? How can you encourage them?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the themes about which we've spoken today are themes like be slow, seek to understand first, love listens. Even the peppermint illustration, just ask why. Why is that fence there? Why is that policy there? Why is that service time in its place? Ask a lot of questions. Fertilize the ground for change by having a lot of private conversations with people. What do you think? I'm thinking about this. Would you help me with? Don't ever just make a change by standing up in front of people and saying, well, we're changing this. Gotta know there's 1,000 conversations that ought to precede that.
That's right.
And then just taking a couple of those other things, like don't change, try, fertilize the ground, communicate well. I feel like even a young man can effectively make good Joshua changes in his ministry if he follows just a couple of these time honored principles.
That's really good. The trying things, I want to go back to that for a second. Early on, I don't know how many different chairs we had on the pulpit. It was like, try this, take it off, try this. And it was funny because some people got to complaining about my style that I had on the platform. So I just took everything off. One Sunday, everybody came to church and there was just a pulpit there. After that, it didn't matter what I put up. It looked better than a naked stage. They're like, just get something up there.
Yeah,
we don't care.
Good. That's good.
Yeah, but I think trying is good. But we had a house, the first house we bought in Ohio, Kurt. It was just kind of older rundown. The house was built 1925. Nobody had done much to it. And we, Carrie and I just married, the house was $50,000. We're paying a lot more than that for cars today, $500 a month payment over those days again. And by the time we moved to North Carolina, I think we'd been in that house about 9 years, I guess. But at year 7, our flowers and our hydrangeas and all of our landscaping, my grass, everything was beautiful. And I remember talking to a gardener, and he says it takes about 7 years of cycling of the fertilizers and everything to really get your plants here in Ohio where you need them. And the bottom line is, it takes time.
Yes.
The church guys you're going into is not going to be necessarily the church that you're thinking you want 3 years from now, and it shouldn't be 4 years from now. It takes time. It takes time to invest. It's taken me 7 years to get the staff around me that's ideal for us to function the way that we're functioning. But the other thing is, you have time.
Right.
And don't get in a hurry, and don't think all this has got to happen now. Man, it could be 10 years down the road, and that's okay. You're preaching the word, you're teaching, you're being faithful to your calling. You'll get there eventually. And until those curtains come down, they're a great conversation piece.
Yes. Yes.
And just preach the word with the curtains behind you.
Yes.
And so, God, I'd encourage you, just don't think, hey, we're not Kurt Skelly at Faith, and we've got to get there year 1. Now, it's taken 7 years.
Yep.
And we're at 10. And somebody posted the other day, oh, no wonder churches aren't growing. Look at these pews. Man, I got the ugliest pews in the world. Pews are not hurting my church from growing.
No.
If you're giving them what you've all eaten at restaurants or the best restaurants I've had sushi in places that scare me, but it's awesome sushi. And if you are giving a quality product, they'll sit on the floor.
Yep.
To come and hear the teaching of the word of God. So don't think you've got to throw out the pews and bring in the chairs or do this. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
If you are faithful to your calling, you love the people, you love the Lord, you love His word, and you're giving them that product.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah. Kurt, man, thank you, brother.
Yeah, I've enjoyed. Let's do this again sometime.
We're going to do it again. Absolutely. Just because that's the only way I'm going to get a chance to catch you and see you,
Love it. Yes, sir.
Right there. I was hoping it was going to be Israel, but God had other plans for that too.
All right, we'll do that too.
We'll do it again. Yeah. And we're going to do Journeys of Paul together soon too. So, hey, Kurt, love you. Appreciate you. Hey, before we go, tell people what's going on at Faith. You guys have got some things happening. Just for curiosity, in case somebody's heard through the rumor mill, oh, Kurt's leaving, just kind of fill everybody in what's up.
Yeah, so I left Harvest after 20 years of ministry in Pennsylvania, and really felt that God was leading me to just be a help to churches and to pastors, not an evangelist per se, but just a pastor helping pastors. Yeah. But the Lord kind of detoured us. We came to Faith. There were some needs here that we felt like our gift mix and experience could help. So we came to Faith, and we've been here for 7 years and love every minute of it. And God's done some amazing things. But just recently, I announced to our church that I'm on a 3-year plan to transition, because I still have that in my heart in the fourth quarter of my life to be a help to churches and pastors, to have conversations like these on Sundays, on Mondays at churches. So we formed a pulpit committee, and we have actually called our first candidate who's one of our associate pastor, to be the next pastor of our church. We're going to vote on him here in about 3 weeks. And I believe that will go successfully. We'll see what the church family decides, but I have confidence.
So do you want resumes yet?
What's that?
You want resumes yet?
Not yet, because I think we're going to vote him in.
Guys are writing them right now.
He'll be our co-pastor, working alongside with me, and then, of course, will serve as our pastor in the next couple of years.
Man, how good is that? That's wonderful. That's ideal, I think. And if you talking about staff, you guys going into your church, if you can start with those guys at 15 years old, and 7 years from now, at 22, they come back and they work with you.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is.
That's a wonderful thing to bring them up from within. All right, Kurt, well, we'll be praying for
yes, sir.
3 weeks coming up. By the time this gets launched, it'll already happen, but we'll definitely be praying through that transition, and even for your ministry to Israel and for our brothers and sisters in Christ. I know we're not hearing the half of it, I'm sure,
right,
of what's going on there. So we just need to keep all those folk in prayer. Again, Kurt, thank you so much. Guys, thank you for tuning in and listening. If you know that this podcast or this video can be an encouragement or a blessing to someone else, man, share it, like it, and let others know where they can listen and find help as the assistant pastor serving in that second seat of ministry.